My talk's a little different, despite the fact that I am, a technical BSD person. This is much more in line with my other work in the social sciences. So just to do a quick overview, I'll introduce a couple of things, kind of review my paper that you all have in the booklet. I highly recommend that you read it. I write in a way that's very narrative. It's actually designed to be read and covers all this stuff in much, much more detail. But my goal really is to foster a discussion here now with all of you. Because if it's just me talking, this really kind of doesn't work. It only kind of works if we are active and we do things, not just talk about them. And you will have opinions, and I like opinions. Opinions are good. I even like dissenting opinions. So if you listen to me talk and you're like, that guy's full of shit, let me know. I'm happy to hear it. So who am I? Most people in the room know who I am. But for those of you who don't, I'm a doctoral student at the Department of Science and Technology Studies, which is kind of an interdisciplinary humanities discipline. It combines anthropologists, historians, sociologists, and philosophers of science around issues of science and technology. And I'm at RPI, which is in Troy, New York, in upstate New York. My dissertation work mostly focuses on questions of collaboration and participation in technology, and I specifically study those who are marginalized in tech. So for the most part, I don't study the kinds of people who are sitting in this room today. I'm a former OpenBSD developer, so I've been around this scene for quite a long time. I do other work for some BSDs on microcontrollers, which I'll talk about in the work in progress section a little bit. I'm heavily involved with NiceBug in New York City. I'm one of the admins there. I restarted the bug up in upstate New York as well, and I run that. I run probably the last free OpenBSD shell service on the internet called Devious. I teach this BSD stuff at RPI. I frequently talk at BSD conferences. And I'm a big community activist. So I do BSD. I do BSD. I just also do social science. So we, in many ways, what I would say, have a people problem. So with the exception of Drew, who I saw walk in, what's the answer to that first question? Well, everyone here, including myself, is a white or Japanese man, again, with the exception of Drew, who I saw walk in. In many ways, cultures produce the people in a community, and the people in a community produce cultures. So they kind of have this symbiotic recursive effect, which we kind of have to break. The last 40 years, it's been all men, mostly privileged, mostly white, or other privileged male groups. The conclusion we don't want to reach is that people who use BSD in any context and whose lives are directly affected by technology are white and Japanese men. Because we know that's not true. Every cell phone in everybody's hand runs something that we all wrote in the BSD projects. So this technology literally affects everybody, down to the kind of fundamental ways of living. And we do have women, people of color, transgender, and many other underserved groups in our community. Not to say those categories are mutually exclusive or non-overlapping, but it's just an easy way to list them all. What I want to know, and what I think we can do better, is really center these voices. A lot of people get pushback when you start to say things like that, but I don't think it's particularly all that scary. And I also think that it'll be very beneficial to our community at large by taking the focus kind of off the people who have had the spotlight for the last 40 years and putting it on people who have never had the spotlight, and seeing what they'll do with BSD and all of our technologies. And this is not an either-or problem. Often if you read, especially Twitter or Reddit or any of those other terrible things, they talk about, oh, these people are coming to destroy our communities and take away all the things we love about technology and all the things we love about BSD. And that's really not true. No one here is going to stop doing the work they're doing just because we start adding a more diverse group of people. So we only have positives to benefit from this. And one manifestation, of course, is the conferences for this people problem. So in the paper, I talk about what the percentages of non-male speakers at conferences are. We can ask the same for any underserved group. I did women because that was the easiest one to do based on the data that's publicly available. And that's kind of the chart. So only 4.4% of all talks given at BSD conferences in the past 4 years have been given by someone who's not a man. And for a lot of them, there have been no female speakers at our conferences. And I don't think it has to be that way. There are plenty more women and other underserved groups who are around BSD, who would jump at the chance to talk at an Asia BSD Con or a BSD Can. So the way I kind of analyze these things is what we call a generative justice framework. It comes from Professor Ron Eglash, who's at RPI. It's kind of a Marxist analysis when you get down to it. It asks how value from labor can be kept unalienated, so how we can retain the benefits of our labor, and how we can put it back into our work as we see fit. So open source as a whole is kind of an example of this. When we write open source code, no matter what companies or other people do with it, we still always have the ability to use our code, to modify our code how we see fit, to add to it, to take away from it. We never lose the benefits of our work. And I think we can do this for diversity as well. And so my paper talks a lot about how that happens. So one of the ways that we've tried to do this in the past year has been with stickers. So this sticker is actually from BSDCon in Virginia, VeriScience Conference. I don't know if you can all see it, so I'll just read it. It says, "I choose FreeBSD because the focus is on my skills and willingness to learn and not my appearance or gender." And it may seem like that's a perfectly okay sticker, but it's not. There's actually an interesting paradox. So when you phrase things in that way, it contributes to what we call a race and gender colorblind narrative. The point isn't that we don't care about these things. The point is, how do we leverage these things in a way that benefits everybody? And paradoxically, those kinds of stickers actually make it more difficult to do diversity work. And there have been studies that show that when you try to do a colorblind community, all you do is get more white people in your community. So what would be better? And I'm not going to say I have all the answers. But the sticker out there for this conference just says FreeBSD. That's pretty good. I like that. Maybe we start a FreeBSD women. I have been very vocal about starting a FreeBSD women mailing list, or some other thing like Debian does, like Python does. And I think we have enough people, enough women in our community that something like that could be done. And maybe having them design their own stickers, because they'll know better. They'll certainly know better than I will. Let's put it that way. And we can always interface with PyLadies, with Debian women. There's Arch chicks. There's a whole bunch of others that are popping up. But stickers are only one thing. It's not really a thing that I think we should focus a lot on. But if we're going to do that kind of marketing, there are ways of doing it better. Oh, that's very small. So codes of conduct. FreeBSD has one. As far as I know, none of the other BSDs have one. That's probably a problem. There's a lot of starting points. You don't have to write this from scratch. There's something like a few hundred, if not a few thousand codes of conduct to model yours after. There's only a couple that I think are really worthwhile. I personally like the contributor covenant, which is written by a transgender woman who is in the open source community, who mostly does work in Ruby and other languages. Because she is able to leverage her experiences as an underserved coder in writing a code of conduct that makes it a lot easier for people like her and other minorities to join these communities. And that's really the point. We need more people. We need to do whatever we can to get those people into our community. And it has to reflect the reality of our community. So one of the things that I didn't like about the code of conduct for FreeBSD is, at least the way it was presented to us from core team, was simply to say, we as core team did this thing and here it is. Which I guess is nice as a starting point, but let's face it, core team is just 9 men. There's no women on core team, and there's almost certainly no racial minorities on core team. So there's just no way that those 9 people could possibly understand and really what the fabric of the FreeBSD community actually is. So it has to be dynamic. So one of the things I've suggested in the paper is maybe every time we have core team elections, we kind of do a revisiting of the code of conduct and ask for amendments and ask for people to say what they like about it, say what they don't like about it, and kind of as a community work out exactly what we want our norms and culture to look like, knowing that 2 years from now, hopefully, it'll change for the better, and then we can do that again, and so on and so on and so on. And it matters. Codes of conduct matter. Whether or not you agree with them, in 2016, not only is it a good business move, because lots of businesses are interested in open source projects that have codes of conduct, the underserved coders who want to join communities look for these things. The easiest way to get somebody to not want to be part of FreeBSD is to not have a code of conduct. Because they'll look at it and say, when something happens, I have no recourse, and I have no one who can trust or believe in me, and they won't come. Another thing we do is educational outreach, which is kind of a combination of formal and informal education. GNN does Teach BSD, which is really great. We had a women-only class that Dan Longil taught in Uppsala in Sweden. Pretty much the entire gamut of education now, someone somewhere is using BSD to teach it. From the youngest of young kids, I teach college undergraduates. Some of that Teach BSD stuff is graduate students. So the whole range of education, at least in the American context, you can teach BSD. There's curriculum out there for you. So like I teach a class every semester on documentation. I have a room full of undergraduates. I have like between 40 to 60 of them for a week. And they sit down and I show them what the FreeBSD documentation, the OpenBSD documentation looks like. And I say, in 2 hours, you need to make a diff and send it to one of the projects. And they do. And you end up with about 30 patches. And that's an interesting way to catch people who otherwise would never have thought to use or think about or engage with BSD. Yes, there are issues of retaining them once you kind of hook them, but the hook is important. And it's not just about forefronting BSD. So there are other ways of teaching BSD other than being in your face, like the documentation class. So even for graduate students, one thing that I do is I test all my educational software that I make as part of my research on OpenBSD. OpenBSD is technically a tier 1 platform for this software. And this kind of software, what it does is it leverages cultural knowledges to teach things like mathematics and computing. So a really easy example is African cornrow hair braiding is a perfect example of things like transformational geometry. And you can teach transformational geometry with that stuff. But just putting it on a base of BSD normalizes what BSD is to these students, who are mostly African American. And so when they want to kind of explore the software a little bit deeper, well, there's BSD for them. And now we've just tapped into a whole new set of people that we've never had before. There's also the Tanzania Digital Library Project, and that we need to do more of, because that's pretty much as good as it gets when it comes to educational outreach. It makes BSD the natural choice for those who are doing these kinds of racial and social justice work. And they're the ones who are able to tap into these networks of underserved coders that in many ways we can't, being mostly white Japanese men. It also breaks BSD out of its stereotypical roles. Who wants to keep going to conferences where all they say is BSD is right on the server and nothing else? Here's a whole bunch of people who are going to use BSD for things we've never thought of. But we need to get it in their hands. And once they have it in their hands, we need to be welcoming for them to get them in and get their code changes in. And generates whole new networks of users and whole new networks of developers. And those new networks are then able to tap into further underserved groups. So it kind of becomes this recursive loop. The The social justice people expose the groups that they're working with. Those groups know other groups, and then they expose them to BSD. Those groups know other groups, and they expose them to BSD. And user groups as well. So research shows that user groups have a profound potential in creating strong BSD identities for its members. So if you want to have a local community that's all about BSD, you don't have to be in New York City to do this. Start a user group. People have been doing that all over the world. And we need more bugs. We need bugs with things like codes of conduct. Codes of conduct are not just for coding communities. They're also for the in-person networks. They're also for conferences. We need bugs that actively seek and recruit and offer speaking roles to those underserved coders. They need role models who look like them. If everyone who gets up on the stage is a white guy, the only people who are going to say, that's a community I belong in, are other white men. We need bugs that listen to the needs of these underserved members and adapt to them. We need bugs that forefront their voices and their social and technical uses of BSD. Because it will certainly be different than what we do. And that's not to say it's good or bad, but it's different, and I think that difference is important. Today's bug speakers are tomorrow's conference speakers. So the 4.4% number, if you want that to change, get your underserved coders speaking at the bugs. So just to wrap it up, because then I really want people to talk. So we ought to have new visions and new ideas for our community and our code. People in this room are not going to be the ones who do it. Contextually, we can't see the world as other people see it. That's just a reality. However, the voices of those who are currently not heard have the potential to radically transform our code and our community, and I think for the better. And it doesn't come at the expense of what we're already doing. Like I said, no one here is going to just stop doing BSD because now we have a bunch more women doing BSD. I mean, that would be absurd. And diversity is not an either-or proposition. We can have it all. We ought to have it all. And these underserved coders, the important part is that they're coders. They're going to do this work regardless of whether or not we're welcoming to them. So if they're going to do this work anyway, we might as well be the ones benefiting from it and not somebody else. So what's next? Some things I kind of offer in the paper. Maybe a free BSD women group. That one I'm very much in favor of. Further revisions to the code of conduct. I know the code of conduct now is in a committee that's made up actually of underserved coders partially. So that doesn't mean we can't open up to the entire community. Encouraging those underserved on the periphery, and there are many on the periphery, to join us in the center. Create an environment where they can move to the center. Work with diversity advocates. This does not have to be internal, solely internal. There are other people out there in this world who do diversity work. And kind of learning to relinquish some social control. I think, at least in the Twitter and Reddit world, people fear that with the status quo changes, they'll no longer have control over this software and this technology world that they've enjoyed for so long. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think we could be up to relinquishing that social control to other voices. Because it's not like we're going away. It's not like we're going to stop doing BSD. My favorite line is we need to start caring as much about our people as we do BSD. And if we only care about the people in this room, then we're really not succeeding. Because there are underserved groups out there. I see them. The shirt I'm wearing proves that we have underserved people who would love a chance at being right here on this stage. And they're good enough to be on this stage. It's not like we'd have to suffer any quality of talks to get those people here. They're doing amazing things with BSD that you've never heard of. And they will be our greatest developers and our greatest advocates if we're willing to let them in. And they'll grow BSD in ways we've never imagined. Like I said, being a bunch of white men, contextually, there's only so much of the world we can see. And what we can see of the world is different than what these underserved coders can see of the world. And there's no reason that BSD can't occupy all of those spaces. And we can have it all. We can lead the technical world, we can lead the social world, we can lead the diversity world. And hopefully, for me, despite the fact that as a social science this is kind of my job, we should have many more talks like this, and I should effectively no longer have a space to talk this kind of talk at a BSD conference ever again. Because next year it should be, those women, people of color, trans women that I know are in our spaces, who are here giving these kinds of talks, and telling you not only about all the great things they're doing with BSD, but how great it is that they now have a community that they can do this in. And we're not going to save the world. This is not some grand, thing. But we can do this part of it. And just maybe, if we lead the way, the other technical communities will follow. So I want to open the floor to whomever wants to talk about these things, and just throw whatever you want out there. This really should be a discussion for how we can brainstorm ways to make this happen. I don't actually know if this microphone goes far enough.
There's a walk around one.
There it is, perfect. Ah, right there.
Turn the light on.
Oh yeah, don't turn the light on.
Or we all sit in the dark.
Yeah. He's in the dark.
We'll all be gone.
So you twice referred to a vocal party out there that is of the opinion that the BSDs, although I suppose you mean the projects, perhaps specific ones, would be harmed by diversity. Could we have some academic citations on that? Because that's a rather sweeping statement referring to a very vocal party that's core to your argument that I personally haven't met.
You mean those who are saying that we'd be harmed?
Yes.
So there are no academic citations that I have for it,
but reference of any kind.
But so Reddit is one.
That's not a person. That's a
okay.
Humans.
Okay.
I don't know we want to name names, but
I'll name a name.
Tangible sources.
I'll name a name. X7J. He's the one that has repeatedly said to my face that FreeBSD would be harmed by diversity. So it's one of your own developers, although not any native developer. He's no longer a FreeBSD developer, but he is one.
So there's one human, okay. Is that the extent of the position of this faction out there?
No.
Okay.
But I'm not going to name names other than his.
I mean, can I actually answer part of that just as a side?
Just, I'm not sure actually where I sit in the question you guys are making, but actually, these attitudes, through NiceBug, we've been battling these for years, right? We've been battling these from the perspective of, IT people in New York, systems people, the machismo, all of the, before programming. I mean, this stuff goes back to prehistoric stuff, and there's these general attitudes that are very, very sexist. We've dealt with them individually, one at a time. They're not things that, they're very, very difficult things to actually track because they turn into naming names, and they turn into, very challenging situations to handle in many cases. But I can very much say that this is a, less and less every year, but this is a regular thing. This is a regular thing. Pulling somebody off list, pulling somebody out of IRC, pulling somebody aside at a meeting and actually saying, like, here's the deal, like, they had a few drinks, but it's not okay here, right? That kind of thing.
Fair enough.
So, somewhere at the beginning of your talk, you had some statistics on like the genders of people giving talks at BSD conferences. So, I guess the intent of this table is to sort of saying that the goal is that this percentage should go up. At least that's what I assume.
I would surmise that 4.4% does not accurately reflect the number of women in our community. Well, we're doing interesting work that is worthy of discussing at a conference.
So my question is, assuming that like the average degree of a person giving a talk at these conferences is at least a bachelor degree in IT or something like that, I don't know exactly. how does this percentage, how much percent?
4.4.
4.4 differ from like graduation rates at universities? For example, university.
So in the U.S., while women do earn more degrees than men over the entirety of academia, they earn something like 25, 26% of technical degrees, or CS degrees, you might want to say. That's still significantly more than 4.4.
Okay, yeah, so for example, the university I went, this is just anecdotal, but that sounds, 26% you said, that sounds like a lot compared to the university I went to.
Well, considering that women make up 50% of the world's population, it seems pretty low.
So no, wait. I mean, what I want to say is, the university I went to, it was probably only 5 to 10%. If I then see these statistics that 4.4% of the speakers at the BSD conferences are also women, then I'd say that this is a problem, at least looking at my university, that's maybe out of our reach, but has more something to do with the schooling.
Do you think like the sort of that funnel problem where there's
yeah.
a problem somewhere higher up, I don't know, higher or lower, I don't know how you're supposed to organize the funnel.
Yeah, there are certain, this is not a problem that is isolated to BSD, or that we can wave some magic wand.
Yeah,
but it doesn't mean we can't do anything to help reverse it. So I think that's kind of where people get caught up. It's like, well, if it's the universities that are having trouble, then what are we supposed to do?
Yeah.
There actually are things we could do, like we could advertise.
I'm absolutely not saying that, like, because of that we shouldn't do anything about it, but I'm just saying that that this percentage is so low is also a consequence of those kinds of factors.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
But again, it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that we just sit there on that number and do nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, it might be interesting to check. So apparently, in the, like you said, 26%. I mean, then apparently in the US it's slightly higher than at least in the Netherlands or maybe Europe. Might be interesting to like those numbers, the American conferences against American universities and European conferences.
So
against,
I mean, each one of those, it's done by conference.
And anyway, other people should also ask questions. So here I'll pass.
Well, I just have sort of a quick one in relation to the chart too. I suspect there's no way you could get this number, but I would be very curious as to what that would look like if you started breaking it up by age, which is sort of closer to that funnel problem where effectively if you took the most senior people, my guess is the number is very low and we sort of don't care because that's not fixable anymore. But as you start going down in age, you'd be curious, is there some gradient which, you would hopefully be able, we care about fixing from somewhere down in there.
Yeah, I mean, I just grabbed these from the websites, and I'm not going to go around to every single speaker in the last 4 years and be like, excuse me, how old are you?
Well, I'm disappointed that you are.
Oh, well. John, how old are you?
Oh.
Right. One thing though I would throw in. I'd throw in is that I don't know if there's the idea of university graduation, like graduating with a CS degree, as we said in university, is actually very reflective of the overall technical community, right? I mean, I for one I did not finish my undergraduate education, right? I'm not in these stats, and I'm a white guy that tips it the other way. But I mean, I think this is also something that is, how can I put it, makes us actually more responsible, perhaps, in the community to actually engage, because we do have a bigger impact on people who are self-taught, people who are coming into technology from odd angles, right? So I don't know if it could be. I don't know if there's a clear way to statistically do it.
Yeah, and for certain, most of the people that I work with are people who do not have any degrees. Not all of them even have a high school diploma.
Yeah, exactly. But you need some metric to base it on. Say like because 50% of the people in the world are women. That's just a really cheesy metric. That doesn't help.
Well, I guess I get back to one of Brian's points earlier on. 51% of BSD users are women because that's yourself.
Yeah.
realize what's bugging me is that problematic people, which every community has, are accidental spokespeople, if that's the one person you meet relating to that project, and they have their name in front of that domain name, and it's like, that is that project. But I can safely say that particular person who has antagonized a great many individuals, including myself, is not a representative of the project in any formal sense. And yes, it accidentally happens, and in doing, say, many years of a local group in my town and community work, the response to these things is critical. And maybe the response gets formalized in a policy, but no policy will prepare you for the bizarre stuff you will come across in the community. And I can fault each project for its either delayed responses to challenges, and I admit a bunch of us geeks aren't ready for a lot of these surprises. Now, I've been screamed at by various communities for various things, all OSCON related. There's all sorts of folks out there, but to have, in this, I'm hearing that this person is a representative, and you said you're a developer. Well, I trust, Drew, you don't consider these problematic people a representative of you and your position. It's like some of that logic breaks down. So, yes, these problems are out there, but this, what might be gross oversimplification is problematic similarly. So, to be constructive, I'll say the responses, in my experience, are critical. The timing of them, the sincerity of them, and that's what makes groups survive these surprises that you cannot plan for. There will be a bizarre person who will do something bizarre, and no document will prepare you for it.
Sure, and I think part of it too is getting held up on I'm not blaming individuals. I'm not suggesting that individuals are somehow representative of the project. You would ask me for academic citations for things that do not exist, and then you ask me to name a name.
Well, you made it sound like a formal contingent. That's a very informal contingent where, on a tiny basis, this one person with a domain name attached to their email address, yes, for somebody is that representative, but they are not a board member. They're not a project or a team member.
No, of course not. So where in my talk did I make it sound like a formal contingent?
A formal representative. Contingent would be more people because you make it sound like there are a lot of them. We focused it down on one and others, and yes, I will be first to say every community has problematic people. I even have a sociopath how-to based on my experiences in the community. I'm happy to share that, but let's not... Responses I found critical. Outreach is another thing, but separating the two is important. It's just my simple thought there.
Sure.
And I'd love to hear from the tribal elders, such as Eric and company.
Okay, so you said you like the idea of code of conduct having sort of some regular update process. Right?
Yes, because one thing we can be sure about people is eventually we all die, so the community will not be what it is.
Fair enough. We can assume that's likely true, but what started would worry me about that is I don't know too much about FreeBSD's code of conduct, but I don't even know exactly what I think of code of conduct. But I suspect it took them a while to get to where they are with it. Like, it probably wasn't a particularly quick or easy process.
No, and nor should it be.
Right. And so if people have to go through this every 2 years, and as you said, the people will change for various reasons. It's not so much that seems like a big time sink that you have people, that it would be asking of people, but I would worry that you're going to start having a lot of fatigue to the point where people either don't care anymore, or phone it in to them, or just don't want to be part of that process. And so I would worry, and I wonder how you'd respond to that. But there's a lot to change a code of conduct regularly, amend it or whatever. And I assume you mean with some, it's not going to be this thing where eventually it's a book because we just keep adding and adding. I'm assuming that you'd have some reasonable process come up. But isn't there somewhere that you'd end up kind of turning people off from doing it? Because most of us probably would prefer dealing with code than codes of conduct.
Sure.
And I'm really, really sorry I said it that way.
Yeah, and it's not to say that the 2 years is like a hard and fast. It was just, there happens to be a 2-year cycle in FreeBSD, and obviously the timing can, certainly not have to map onto 4G. Yeah, it's a problem that getting people to want to care about codes of conduct instead of code. And I can't say that I have a particularly good answer.
But also there is a point where you'd be asking too much. Like there's only so much time people should have to give to something like that. So I would just say I worry about any sort of short-ish timeline.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I just wondered, I don't know about all this stuff, but you talk about that and the stories behind and so on, and but why these people have not participated yet in the projects?
Who here in this room looks like that? Who here looks at me and says, that's someone who looks like me, that's someone I can emulate? Other white guys. So if you don't have, it's kind of a catch-22 in some ways to start it off.
But for example, you said that you know some people who would like to participate, but they don't because there are some people they're afraid of.
There's a number of reasons, and I shouldn't get into all of them.
So but you know them, so you can like tell them that that's okay to come in these groups, or.
But they also do their research. They also
they are like
like with the codes of conduct, like they look at these things. People decide to go to PyCon because PyCon is a very strong, well-written anti-harassment code of conduct, and it's right there on the website, and you can see it.
So they participate because that code of conduct exists.
Because when something happens, and remember, we see life as we exist in it.
Yeah, sure.
For a lot of these people, they experience routine bigotry. Let's just say it's bigotry, routine bigotry. And it does turn over to places where there happen to be a lot of people. So yes, they need some recourse in case something happens.
It's like they see that as
and they see that not only as, they see it as if or when something goes wrong, I'm not going to be left on my own and called a liar. And people will listen to me and try to get to the bottom of this. Now, of course, we're people, and ultimately, any individual case may have who knows how many number of flaws. But they would much rather take a chance where they know that someone is listening to them versus a place where they have no idea if anyone is listening to them.
You just raised the PyCon. Or the PyCon conference code of conduct on. Is everybody in the room familiar with where that came from and how that came about?
No.
Okay, so I was involved in PyCon way back in the early days. Haven't been in a long time. And in the early days, it was 200-person con, and it quickly grew as the language grew, and it became 1,000-person con and 2,000-person con, that kind of thing. As it was growing, the numbers it got a little wilder and more out of control, and there were some incidents at the conference that involved, a couple of guys very, very seriously harassing some women who were attendees at the conference, and they had a very, very serious incident in the community that created. There was just a lot of wasted time and work, and people were very upset. A lot of us really do exactly what that is this year. So that generated this code of conduct, and that generated a conversation that led to something that's actually now regarded as one of the most open, technical communities socially that exists. But it took a very bad incident for it to happen.
And it would be better if we didn't have that repetition. We just got to where they are without having to go through some tough incident.
I find it interesting that's actually something to watch how they, like a lot of people don't know that story, don't remember the story, so we're there for it. And it's not like they buried it, but that's not what the conference is known for. Right? That's, yeah, that's it.
That's another hand.
Yeah, so this is just
bit nitpicking, but I don't think that it's actually reasonable to compare us to Python conferences in any way. I mean,
so I disagree 100%.
So,
and I'll tell you why. Because this was also brought up to me for my paper. It is not to say that we are somehow Python, that we are equally as popular as Python, that our conferences are as well attended as Python. But it is to say that these problems manifest in communities, and we're not immune to them. And this is one way that a community very successfully, dealt with a problem and made sure it's never going to happen again.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of nice.
So it's not to compare us, it's to say that that is a model that we can learn from.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just want to make that clear now, because a couple of minutes ago I sort of had the feeling that we were comparing.
Yeah, no, it's not to compare, it's to say that that is a model that we can certainly learn from.
Any other questions?
So, since Python came up, isn't it, so it sounds like you're sort of talking about at the same time with codes of conduct and similar, and all the various things that go along with that. You're talking about both conferences and communities in the same breath. And I personally don't know, to me it would seem like there's a lot of reasons why those are very different beasts. And, a conference definitely is not, a conference probably represents a community in some way, or multiple communities that come together. But it would seem to me that there would need to be some actual, evidence to say that the same types of things, in terms of codes of, whether or not a code of conduct is good, or what kind of code of conduct you need, or anything like that. It's not just obvious a priori that a conference and a community, where, for a community as in some BSD or some programming language or whatever, they're not the same thing.
And the codes of conduct are also different between the two.
Right.
So they're not, it's not like you can kind of pick up the conference code of conduct and drop it on
of course there's some just flat out obvious, physical differences.
No eating in this room. I guess there are in fact communities who run conferences where it's their community's conference, and they do use the same code of conduct. For instance, LLVM adopted Django's code of conduct, basically verbatim, because they decided it looked fine and it met their needs. And for their purposes, a single code of conduct that covered both works. For us, I don't see that it could, because we are a mix of, there's a broader BSD community, but the broader BSD community has no way to enforce a code of conduct in any, or even agree on one. I mean, that's just not going to happen. But on the other hand, so in that case, there definitely is a distinction. We need both.
Just one question, just that anybody could answer, maybe Frequency Foundation people, Brian, anybody. Is there any thought right now being put into, with the code of conduct that is, what parts of it are proactive, or some idea of something that we do versus reactive stuff that are, the rules, the law, what happens when things go bad, right? I mean, is there a difference right now? Are we at a place where we're actually, as a group, we're encountering problems that are, I don't know, too nuanced and too new to us to even be able to differentiate this stuff? Does that make sense? The question make sense? Yeah. Does anybody have any thoughts, Brian?
So generally they are spelled out. They're less proactive than reactive, but that doesn't have to be the case. It just happens to be what was written. There's a lot of it is just to spell out, what will and will not be tolerated, and it's generally easy to write out what is not going to be tolerated in this, and be like, well, we're going to do that thing. If that makes sense.
Also, is there some idea of something that we all can agree that we want? Do we want a meritocratic technical environment?
Well, interestingly
that
enough,
doesn't matter anymore.
Interestingly enough, that was the very first change to the FreeBSD Code of Conduct. It was removing the sentence, FreeBSD is a meritocracy.
That word is poison.
That word is poison.
Can you speak to why for a moment?
So meritocracy, when I talked about the race and gender colorblind narrative.
Can I ask Brooks the answer?
Oh, sure.
Sorry. I mean, I guess my answer would be that objectively that's not true. That we look around and we see, you know, we know that in the workplace men are promoted over women. We know that our community doesn't represent the diversity of people out there, and we don't, you know, unless we're the Indian president of Harvard, generally make assertions that, you know, that's because, you know, this group of people is dumber. And so I think it's objectively the case that we are not a meritocracy. What a pure meritocracy would look like, who knows? But, you know, it might not be, it might not be a perfect exact identical mix, but it's certainly not what we have. So objectively, we don't have one.
And let's also not forget that the term, despite the fact that it seems to have been adopted by hackers, was actually coined to describe how bad such a system would be. It actually is a negative definition, not a positive one.
And one comment on the concept that I believe it's trying to address is that there is a great amount of access available. There's an open door to this community based on merit, in which if you come from any background with good code, we say welcome. And that doesn't mean there's a structure of leadership that needs to be based on that separate fact. And we lose that concept in the whole poison group.
I guess I would also comment, as a former core team member, that we elect core team members based on their visibility and their coding ability in some measure, neither of which is a very good measure of who should be on the leadership body of the project. You know, I think we do an okay job of picking people who are, you know, reasonable and have some leadership skills, but I don't think that we do it. You know, yeah, I don't think that we're selecting for the people with the problem-solving skills and the people skills necessarily. I think we do an okay job, but I think a fair bit of it's a bit accidental.
From your perspective, is there a way that could be improved? That sounds like it might not be able to be.
I mean, it's effectively up to the electorate, but we could. I mean, by talking about it like this, and talking and making sure that it's in the minds of the committers who are voting, I think is important. I think, you know, trying to promote people in the community who are good at that sort of thing, and, you know, get them on stage here, for instance, so that at conferences, so people know who they are. I think that's very important. So it's not just, you know, John Baldwin, who did S&P talking. He's a great guy. He's a good member of court. I think he's got a number of those skills, but I think he got there because he did a huge part of the S&P work.
Right.
Sure. And I got there because I go to conferences and I like flying.
Just an idea about outreach. We don't have these underserved groups showing up because they're not sure how the community will respond. If you know a group like that or an individual like that, why not say, particularly with a group, okay, somebody write a paper and go as an experiment? Because I have no experience to say on this, but I feel like this group is as accepting as any as I've ever experienced. And I suspect that would play out in real life. One person goes and says, you know, they weren't the evil monsters I imagined they might be. In fact, they were fairly friendly.
Yeah, there's certainly a catch-22 to it all. Which end of that breaks the cycle?
So, I mean, if you know a group like that, and you were talking about that group, say, well, talk amongst yourselves, see if anybody, you're probably all doing something that would produce an interesting paper at a conference. Somebody write it up and submit it as an experiment.
I guess I do think that the newbie session that we're going to be doing, or the newcomer session, I think they're calling it at BSD Can, is I think hopefully going to be helpful that way in terms of helping people get integrated. As an introvert, when I first join a new conference, I don't know who to talk to, I don't know who to find, you know, who I should meet up with, and I think I'm hopeful that that's going to help. I don't remember where the suggestion came from, but other conferences are doing that.
Five after 4. This will take them again in 5 minutes to get out. Somebody else has questions, you think it gets out in 10 minutes.
One small one. We have one left. I see that. Go easy on the volunteers, because a heck of a lot of people are here voluntarily, and they can switch off like light switches when people like toxic individuals start attacking them. So it's a careful balance between, yes, the structured way things should be and just all the accidental nature of this, which a great many things in the Unix history are accidental, and we were all newbies once, and let's just help each other out.
To get out.
I get out.
So just after this, I'll shout. What I noticed, what I thought was really positive, if you're running a conference like this and you're having a hard time finding female speakers in this case, or even women attending, what I thought was really positive about the last BSD cons, I don't know whether you've been to those conferences, is that you see that a lot of partners show up at the conference. And, you know, sometimes they show up at the conference just to say hi, or with the social events there's a really high attendance of those partners. So eventually what you do get is the ratio of people going to those events is closer to 50-50. And I mean, it would be nice if we could involve more women in the conference itself, but having sort of more mixed group of people was already quite pleasant. And I mean, it would be nice if we could somehow do something like that with BSD Can and the other conferences as well, but I think it's less feasible because with BSD Con, because it's always in a different country, you always have partners saying like, oh, you're going to Malta, I'd like to come along. And I think that's a lot harder to accomplish with, for example, this conference, which is always in the same place, and with BSD Can. So that's
a bit.
Go ahead.
Interrupting the minority.
Give you the mic.
I was just going to say that's a bit of a double-edged sword, because usually in those circumstances, the attendees assume women are partners.
Yeah.
Yes.
100%. I was actually going to give a much darker example, which is like the very old days of DEF CON out west, where majority of women who were there were hookers. Right. I mean. Okay. Right. So that's a brutal example of the kind of how it starts to make the problem worse and create more objectification, more separation, right?
Yeah. I think what I'm going to say is a bit unrelated, but in some way related. Brooks talked about like the fact that the BSD can never agree about a single code of conduct. But I always wondered so far why BSD cannot have a single foundation, you know, with representative members. I never could figure that out. But I know maybe some ego things maybe get into the play, but other than that, there might be other reasons that I'm not aware of. And I just wanted to know. Maybe Brooks can tell me.
Too much politics.
Well, I mean, I would argue that in one respect, this is a real stretch, right? Because we're all very privileged to be sitting in this room. Right? It's a pretty terrific dinner we all had last night. But on the other end, a lot of us came into technology as marginalized people in society, somewhere or another. The introverts, mess around with computers in the dark, doing things that nobody else cared about, people made fun of, right? So I think that genuinely, that stereotype and that archetype is something that actually helps make our, I don't revel in that idea anymore, as like, oh yeah, we got some cool secret that the world doesn't understand us. It creates more division. I think it's a root of what you're asking about here.
Oh, it just makes life more difficult to make that kind of thing. That's why I want to do it.
Yeah.
Excuse me, 10. Check this out.